Cheap Shots. In today's episode, we take a look at another set of 5 28mm lenses. If you caught my previous episode on 28s, you should know that the Nikkor 28mm f2.8 AIS that we looked at was the clear winner. Not only is this lens superb for landscapes, but it's even a champ when it comes to close-up work. It's sharp corner to corner and is amazing, even wide open. The other lenses in that challenge did a pretty good job though, and I feel like it proved that for $50, you can get a pretty decent shooting experience. But what about some lenses that are even cheaper than that? Are there bargain basement 28s out there that can compare to the Nikkor? Would you notice the difference in a real world use? For your work, shooting landscapes, or maybe doing video, could a cheap lens you grab for $10 or $20 from a flea market, thrift store, or yard sale cut it? Well, today we're going to look at some really cheap 28s, third-party lenses that are really common, and even one that I've never seen before. First up is a Vivitar made by Komine. I own two of these, and this one is in great shape. It's small, relatively well built, and solid. 49mm filter thread. This is not the close focus variety, just the plain version. Reviews online say it's average to good, but have they ever really looked at the performance the way we will? Next up is the JCPenney 28mm 2.8. Mine is in Canon FD mount, and it's bigger than the Komine Vivitar with a 55mm filter thread. It's multi-coated, which is a nice feature for these old lenses, but I have no idea who the original manufacturer was. Do you? Let us know in the comments. Then there's an M42 mount Hanimex multicolored lens. Honestly, this could be a twin of the JCPenney, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were both made by the same manufacturer. It could be a Tokina, perhaps based on the build quality. My version has a little bit of haze on it, and I didn't notice this until after I had conducted the testing. So I bring that up ahead of time and keep that in your mind as you're going through and checking out the comparisons. Finally, we have an Auto Aragon 28mm f2.8. It's a silver lens in color, feels a little bit more flimsy to the touch than the others. It's an M42 mount and seems to be the least impressive from the outside. At least that's what it looks like before we mount it to the camera and take some shots. It's the least close focusing as well, and I've never heard of it before. Have you? So in this scene, we're going to take a look at a still life and see how well these 28mm vintage lenses do when we are looking near their minimal focal distance. The first up is this Vivitar 28mm f2.8. I'm focused in here on this particular flower, wide open. It's got a nice rendering, some nice specular highlights blurred here, nice background blur, and reasonably sharp at minimal focal distance. If I was to stop down to f5.6, another reasonable way to shoot this scene so you could get more of the flower or more of the flower bunch in focus, you can see a little bit of a difference. So again, here's 2.8, even more background blur. 5.6, some of the vignetting goes away. 2.8, you can see there's a fair amount of vignetting. 5.6, there's less. Still looks nice, still a nice blurred bokeh in the background. And one item I'll draw attention to is that in the specular highlights, you do start to see that hexagonal highlights represented there. Let's take a look at this in a 2-up. Here again on the left hand side is 5.6, on the right hand side is 2.8. Let's keep 5.6 up on the left, but on the right, so I have the Vivitar now on the right and the Hanimex on the left. You can see both really pretty close here, nice coloring. You know, the Hanimex is the one that has a little bit of haze on the element, and so indoors that's less of an issue here. I like the rendering, I like the bokeh. Look at how nice the specular highlights are even at 5.6 because it's octagonal with a slight curve. They almost look completely round. If that's important to you, this Hanamex or the next one that we're going to look at, which is the JCPenney, might be more to your liking. So let's take a look at that one now. So I've got the JCPenney on the left and the Hanamex on the right. JCPenney very, very sharp at minimal focal distance, especially in the center. Just like the Hanamex, it has those nice roundish specular highlights. One of the reasons I feel like these two lenses are related. The bokeh looks just very, very similar. The JCPenney does for some reason allow me to focus closer by a couple of inches, and you can see the representation here on the left hand side is much larger, but not as large as you would see if we went to the Nikkor, right? And for those who saw the previous 28mm comparison that I did, you know that the Nikkor is not only amazing for landscape and distance photography, but it is just unstoppable and unbeatable when it comes to close-up. And here's a good example. The JCPenney was the closest focusing of the ones that we've looked at so far, and now if we compare it to the Nikkor, there's just a huge difference. The Nikkor, of course, is razor sharp, but allows you to get in much, much closer for more detail. Different shot altogether, right? Totally different. But you could always pull back and shoot the Nikkor to approximate this scene, but you can't get this scene on the left with any of these other lenses. That's just not possible. And the one lens where it's really not possible would be the Aragon. So here I'm going to show the difference between the Aragon on the left here at 5.6 and the Nikkor on the right at 5.6. The Aragon is the least close focusing of all of the lenses tested. The Nikkor is the most close focusing. Now if you were to look at the lens itself, you'd say, oh well, the Nikkor focuses about a foot or so closer. It's not that big of a deal. Well, it is a big deal, especially when you're considering the focal length that we're at. Wide-angle lenses, a foot makes a huge, 3 inches makes a huge difference, let alone an entire foot or so. So, big difference between these two lenses when it comes to how close you could get. Again, though, at 5.6, the Aragon is pretty sharp in the center. If you're not worried about things that are to the side, it is a perfectly usable lens for you too. For this shot, we're going to take a look at the bay and compare these lenses in an area where we could zoom in, take a little look at how it renders details in the center and the corners. Start from wide open here with that Aragon. You can see a fair amount of vignetting if I compare that to, say, 5.6, right? And this is similar for all of these lenses. You're going to see vignetting wide open, some of it go away at 5.6, and then even more of it go away by f8 and by f16. You can see a few differences. You can also see some differences in sharpness, of course, and this will be the case all the way, for all of these. At 2.8, this lens is pretty blurry, even just a little bit out of center. It definitely gets a little better at 5.6, even better at f8, and f16, f8, not much of a difference between the two. I think that's common for all of these, and what we'll do is we'll try to compare these. Well, let's do f8 for most of these. Okay, so here's that Aragon on the left-hand side at f8. On the right-hand side, that's the JCPenney. Here it is on the left side, the JCPenney. We've moved the Aragon to the right. It's tough with changing lighting conditions here outside, but I tried my best to get these as close as possible in terms of exposure. If we look in the corners, huge difference in the corners. The JCPenney much sharper than the Aragon. You can see the individual tiles here at f8. That's just all mush here on the right hand side. as we approach the center third. Also, you know, big improvement here. You can see the details in these houses much better on the JCPenney side. In center, the Aragon's pretty close, pretty sharp, but the JCPenney is even sharper. And of course, that is the case as we move to the left as well. You know, you can't really see what's up in the sign. I think I see no diving here. No wake zone, clearly a big difference. If you were buying glasses, you would say, you know, 1 is better than 2, for instance. Left is better than right. Here they are, big picture. Here they are zoomed in. So let's keep the JCPenney up, and let's change the Aragon to the next one, which is the Hanamex. So now I've got the Hanamex on the left side and the JCPenney on the right. Now, if you remember, this Hanamex has a little bit of an issue. I noticed it after I'd already done the comparisons, but it has some haze on one of the elements and some oil from the aperture, something that could probably be fairly easily cleaned and fixed. But I mention it's because it gives us an idea of what these two lenses, you know, could look like. Now, the JCPenney and the Hanamex, I think, are the same make. They are very, very similar lenses. You can see here wide open, the field of view is almost identical. As we zoom in, you know, you'll see that the sharpness is very close, although the contrast is not as good on this Hanamex. And again, I think that is because of the oil on the blades and the subsequent haze that has, you know, found itself on the elements. But very, very similar lenses in terms of field of view and in terms of rendering. Let's then keep the JCPenney and let's move to the Vivitar. Now, I'm missing the Vivitar at f8. Here it is at 5.6. Just to keep things fair, I'll push the JCPenney down to 5.6 so we can see the difference. If we zoom in on the center, we see both very sharp as expected. I would say that the Vivitar may be even a little bit crisper than the JCPenney in the center. As we move out to the corners, I think I definitely see a much more true rendering on the Vivitar in the corners. You can see the difference in these signs. You can certainly see the difference here. Again, the JCPenney looked great compared to the Aragon, but now against the Vivitar, you could really start to see that the Vivitar is quite sharp all the way to the corners. Now let's take a look at the Nikkor. Again, here's the Nikkor on the right at 5.6. On the left, let's see if we can get that Vivitar up. Here's the Vivitar on the left, the Nikkor on the right, and let's zoom in. So again, both pretty sharp, but the Nikkor is just a little bit crisper, has a little bit more pop. As we start to move over, it's almost as if the little bit better that the Vivitar was over the JCPenney is the same amount that the Nikkor is better than the Vivitar. You know, you can really see this stand out, and all the way even into the corners, it's just a little bit sharper. You can see when I zoom out, nice color rendering, nice contrast on the Nikkor side, and you know, quite sharp here even into the extreme corners. Field of view is not exactly the same, but pretty close. I think close enough that you could really get a sense of the comparison. Now let's look at another beach scene. I'd like to show what these look like big picture first. We looked at the last one at f8. I'd like to stop this down one more stop and take a look at these shots at f11. You'll see as we go through, and I'm starting with the Vivitar here. Now I'm moving to the Nikkor, which, you know, has been strongest. Here's the Nikkor, the Vivitar. Let's look here at the Hanamex. If we remember, this is the one that was a little bit hazy, has a hazy element. And frankly, I feel like you could see that in the rendering. Comparing it to the Vivitar, you can see it's just a little bit washed out, a little less contrast, definitely due to the haze that's on there. If we look at the JCPenney, that's pretty similar to the Vivitar. Here's the Vivitar, here's the JCPenney, and here's that Aragon. So if I'm looking at all of these lenses from, just a big picture sense without zooming in, they're all giving me a pretty good image here. If I was sharing this online, social media, etc., I wouldn't have a problem with any of these lenses. I think they're rendering all very, very similarly. If we were to zoom in a little and do some comparisons, then I think you would start to see a couple of differences. And whether or not these make a difference or make sense to you is a very personal decision. I'm going to zoom in here on these lifeguard stand holders. This is the area that I was focusing in when we were taking these pictures. I have the Nikkor on the left, the Vivitar on the right. You can see they're both quite sharp in the middle. Maybe the Nikkor slightly sharper, a little bit more contrast. Maybe the coating's a little better. If we go into the extreme corners, again, Vivitar is pretty sharp. You can still kind of see a lot of detail, but not quite as good as the Nikkor. Does that matter to you? Is it worth $150 to have that degree of extra sharpness? Well, that's again a personal decision. I think there's still plenty of detail here on the right side, but it all depends on what your use case is. Let's take a look at the next one. Again, comparing the Nikkor on the left. Now let's look at the Hanamex. That's the one that's a little bit washed out. You can definitely see that issue that we were talking about with the hazy element, but still pretty sharp, right? You could read that sign almost. These are very, very close. Maybe slightly better here on the Nikkor side. Look at the American flag. But if we went to the JCPenney, let's see how much that does. I mean, this is really close, guys. It's not a clear off winner. Even when you get all the way into the corner, the differences are so slight that I would have a hard time saying that there's a huge justification to go with the Nikkor versus that JCPenney just in this shot. I think whichever one you have is going to suit you best. Let's take a look at what the Aragon does. Now, if this was a picture that I liked the composition of it, the way the clouds were, I would keep the one on the right more than the Nikkor, right? I mean, this is the ultimate use of the lens. It's going to be a landscape lens. I mean, if it's a better shot, that's the shot I'd keep. If we pixel peep and zoom in, yes, it is a little bit sharper on the Nikkor side, no question, and much sharper if we zoom out into the corners. But I mean, how much? Is that really, really worth a huge difference in price? If you happen to have the lens on the right in your bag, I would have no problem shooting it all day. Again, though, Nikkor is definitely crisper. It's definitely clearer. There's more contrast, as there should be for a lens that's 10 times the price. So how did these lenses pan out? Well, it's no surprise that none of the cheapies dethroned the Nikkor, but I did take some amazing photos regardless. In fact, that one shot with the JCPenney at 5.8, I printed it out at 13 by 19 and it's on my wall. Looks great. Before I give my final thoughts, if you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe. My goal is 1,000 subscribers and I'm about a third of the way there. It would really mean a lot to me. And let me put in a plug for my next review of 28mm lenses too. I'd like to do a comparison of a few better known varieties that I've collected that are a little bit smaller in size, but have a really good reputation online. The Konica 28mm 3.5, the Pentax Super Takumar 28 3.5, and the Yashica 28 2.8, and maybe even a couple of others, so stay tuned. So, back to today's lenses. Hey, they're all good enough if you were looking for a little lens to throw in your bag to take some landscape shots on a full frame camera. I'm sure they'd be great if you're looking for a 42mm equivalent lens on a crop sensor too. If you're looking for discrete street photography with focus markings on the barrel, these are absolutely great for that. I'm really surprised by the JCPenney and Hanamex specimens. I think they're the same lens, and if I had to say who the manufacturer was, as I said before, I'd guess it's Tokina. Really great for landscapes, and they can focus pretty close. Multi-coated and really solidly made. The Vivitar is a winner too. It's nice and compact, perfectly useful and discreet. The Aragon was the worst of the lot, but I'd say it's still usable. My guess is that it's the oldest, as it has the biggest 62mm filter size. It feels a bit flimsy and never quite gets sharp in the corners, even when it's stopped down. The longer minimal focus distance, though, is why I'd avoid it the most. But if it was in my bag, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot with it. Still, there are much better choices out there for less than 20 bucks. So there you have it. I hope today's video inspires you to go out and shoot with whatever you've got in your bag. And if you're just starting out or don't have a lot of money to spend, don't be discouraged if you can't afford hundreds or thousands of dollars on a lens. If you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe. Until then, go out into the world, start taking some great, cheap shots.